You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, crossing the Rubicon.
And welcome, folks, to another Joe Dalton show here at Dublin South FM. I have a very special man on the phone today. He is in his late years and has been holding our sovereignty for many, many decades. History always tells us or gives us the key to our future. And the man that I have on today is Billy McGuire. Billy, how are you?
So, what a wonderful introduction. I hope I live up to it. And I'd like to say hello to your listeners as well.
Thank you. Billy, it's a great honour, I have to say. I only really came aware of yourself and what you have been doing for ERA, probably maybe over the last month, 2 months ago. And for me, I'm a lover of history and I'm very curious. And the more that I looked into this and the more that everything sort of evolved, the more questions and the more curiosity I'm starting to become. But let's keep everyone hanging on there at the moment. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
The importance of it is the Irish Republican Brotherhood, IRB, and they founded and funded the state. And I'm the anointed president of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. And as you know, all the political parties in this country came out of the IRB. It was a tragedy what happened, the Civil War. But it was the IRB, they're going by 1858, James Stephens, and he walked 3,000 miles around Ireland to set up the Irish and Fenian Republican Brotherhood. And John O'Mahony, the two of them, he set up the Fenian Brotherhood in Dohoney's in America. And they're both on 1858, 16 Number Street for the Irish Republican Brotherhood, for James Stephens on St. Patrick's Day. And Dohoney's in New York on St. Patrick's Day, 1858, by John O'Mahony. And they come down, the Fenians were around, and Young Irelanders and all that. They were all around, but they needed to get, Britain has been our problem for a long, long time. And they needed to get our sovereign government, and that's what they were looking for. So we do, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, as you know, the harp is the covenant between God and man with all the information for his planet Earth and our civilization. And the two five-stringed harps, that's Anno Domini. They're over the four courts, but of course they're not properly lined. And people don't know anything about them today. But all technology, everything comes from that today. And all the strings, they all mean something. And that's what the Irish Republican Brotherhood, we're not a religious organization or anything like that. We're a secular organization. It's the sovereignty of God and the sovereignty of mankind. That's what we do. And if you haven't got sovereignty, of course, you're a slave. And that's our problem today, what happened with Britain. And, things were difficult. It was the old Celtic monks. Sovereignty comes from God.
Yeah.
And constitutions and monarchy and that, they're all man-made. And that's the difference between the two. And we hold the sovereignty of God. If you read our proclamation, it's always referred to as God. But having said that, I make it quite clear, I'm not a very probably religious person, but we honor and we respect religions, bona fide religions, and we honor God, because no man or woman understands God. But you can understand those two five-stringed harps which he gave, which were on the Ark of the Covenant, and they were carried here to Loughgur in County Limerick. And that information is still in Loughgur, but unfortunately it has been airbrushed out, mostly by Britain. You see, Britain doesn't have sovereignty, it's royalty they have. And if you go back to 1155, Pope Adrian IV, he gave Hibernia to Henry II to build his empire. And that's not, that bull laudabilliture that's not correct. That is propaganda, lies, deception, and fraud. And that's the start of it. And then if you go back to Henry VIII, and the problem between Ireland and Britain Britain wanted to expand their empire. And what Henry VIII did was, Roman Christians believed that only the Pope in Rome, Christ vicar on earth, can anoint a sovereign.
Yeah.
And Henry VIII, as you know, fell out with the Pope in Rome. And he declared himself Diamondos, he was equal to God, and he didn't need the Pope. And in those days, and he turned the monarchy in Britain into a corporation. And that corporation, as you know, corporation, Joe, has no respect for people or sovereignty or anything else. It's only interested in money. And in actual fact, it gets out of hand in the end because it's greed. And greed much wants more. And that's the problem today. What you're witnessing today in the world, all this trouble, is greed. And it's all corporation. Whereas if you have a sovereign Dáil government, you're responsible to the sovereign people. Our people are sovereign. And, we take the 1918 32 county election. That is, what I do really. And that's the conflict between Britain and Ireland, is that 1918 32 county election. Called on the 14th of December 1918 by the British government. And on the 28th of December, IRB Sinn Féin, now not those others who claimed that there could be provisional Sinn Féin or the Free State Sinn Féin or those, IRB Sinn Féin, all 32 counties, they won on the 28th of December 73 seats out of 105.
Yeah.
And that's the mandate the Irish Republican Brotherhood were given to found and fund the Sovereign Republic of Ireland, the Sovereign Dáil government, the Sovereign Dáil courts, War of Independence as a defence force, and be accountable to the sovereign people. You have to have accountability, you see, for sovereignty. And our people are sovereign, and that's what we do. That's why we do all this, is that the people are sovereign, and they must get the benefit of the assets of the state. And the whole point of sovereignty is, if you go into another country, you respect that country's sovereignty, and you respect the sovereignty of the people, and you respect the assets of the people. But unfortunately, Britain didn't do that. Henry VIII changed the monarchy into a corporation, and that's only for greed and money. And they just went in and robbed and plundered the assets of all the states, and that they went to all those Commonwealth countries. They don't have sovereignty; it's royalty they have. It's so important that understand the difference between sovereignty and royalty. And I do know that when I was involved in peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process, but Henry VIII, it goes down then to George V. And George V then, the 21st of January 1919 in the Mansion House, he and the British government, they refused to honour that mandate. And what they did was, King George V, he declared Dáil, the sovereign Dáil, to be at the assembly.
Yeah.
And he sent in his Cairo gang to execute and annihilate all members of the Dáil government and all members of the sovereign of the Dáil courts, the judges, and all the civil servants, all members of the IRB. And you talk about that day. That was the first day that the Garda Síochána were on duty, 21st of January 1919. And they came out to the Irish volunteers. There's two volunteers, the Irish volunteers, and then you have the volunteers which went with Redmond. They split and they went with Redmond, but it's the Irish volunteers. And that conflict has been going on. I mean, that's why Collins was executed in that, And you never hear of the IRB today. And I think it's very sad. And there's a lot of, that civil war has caused a lot of problems and a lot of hardship. But I mean, when you look at your passport in that, you're a sovereign citizen. So the 12 strings has to have air underneath it. And it's very important, all that knowledge, we can talk about the harps later on, and that if you want to.
Yeah.
They're in Lochgar in County Limerick. And just the old monasteries you see in those days. they had all that knowledge. They had it here in Ireland, and they had it in Britain as well. But Henry VIII, he sacked all those, and he took all that knowledge for himself to expand his empire. And it's the expansion of the empire. And up to then, Ireland was the breadbasket of, well, Britain anyway, and, they did export to Europe and that. Because trade is the lifeblood of a nation, and but it's also has to be accountable. And that's why these corporations, they're not accountable to anybody. They don't want to be accountable. They didn't slavery. And that's why we have to be so careful today. We've seen all that hardship that they imposed on our people. And that's where our troubles come from. But it's very interesting then in the Second World War, and usually these wars are caused, expansion of territory and going into countries and taking their assets and, enslaving people. That's not civilization. And at least with those old monks, that they were the ones, that if you take the Skelligs, and that they had all that information about sailing, mathematics and science. You have to learn all that. And it all comes from the harp. And those two 5-string harps, that goes back to King David. It's supposed to be over the 4 chords, but they're not properly lined. I mean, that's a desecration of our sovereignty. And Guinnesses, that's a desecration of our sovereignty. To use the harp as the measure for the pint of Guinness. That is a scandalous thing to do. And the peace, reconciliation and prosperity process of which I'm used to be very much involved, I'm still involved in it, but unfortunately it's just been airbrushed out of our history. And that goes back to the Second World War. And, the mayhem and savagery and brutality that was going on in Europe at the time. And it was out of control. What we see today, it was 10 times worse than that. And the Vatican, we have 2 embassies in Rome. We have the Free State one in Rome, but the sovereign one is in the Vatican. And I go back then to the Second World War, when the diplomatic corps in the Vatican, they were trying to find some way to save all the prisoners of war that were being starved and brutalized, and it was shocking. And the only thing they could come up with was Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. He was running the Vatican at the time, and he and our ambassador P.J. Kiernan, who was married to Delia Murphy, people will remember her as a famous singer, and they got together with the diplomatic corps. Now, the importance of Hugh O'Flaherty was Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. He was known as the Vatican Pimpernel, and he had the ear of the Pope. In actual fact, he was running the whole show, but he was also an IRB man. So the sovereign Dáil government, which they had to have, they weren't all members of the diplomatic corps. They had to have a sovereign government, because sovereignty comes from God. And he negotiated, because our sovereign Dáil government, by the will and wish of all the people of the 1980 and 32 county election, that's where it comes from. And if you read the proclamation, you'll see very clearly. And he negotiated with the Supreme Council of the IRB in GHQ Vaughan's Hotel. And in those days, before that, the Vatican, there were difficulties there. They would always hope that Britain would come back into the fold and all that. And they were using their influence to make the IRB and the IRA and that illegal assemblies and all that. But anyway, Monsignor O'Flaherty, he negotiated with the Vaughan's Hotel with the Supreme Council. And the importance about all that is that Sam McGuire, who was our secretary of, GAA fame, and he was Church of Ireland, but he was brought up and he was trained for the British Civil Service. And he got himself into the post office in London. And his office and his desk, all the sort of intelligence of the Crown Forces and the Royal Navy came through his desk. So he had all that intelligence worldwide where they were, at war. But every Saturday he brought that intelligence to Vaughan's Hotel. In the early days of Vaughan's Hotel, we used just to rent a room from Mrs. Vaughan on behalf of the Irish the Fenian Republican Brotherhood coming on, the Fenian Air and all those. But when it came for Britain to set up the 1918 32 county election, we bought Vaughan's Hotel, and we were lucky enough that the McGuires had a fund that they had over the years, and we were able to put up a substantial amount of money for that 1918 32 county election. Anyway, we were talking about the background to the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. So when I was a child, I grew up in what we know as an old house on the River Shannon there in Castletroy, near Cassie, it's called, where the Limerick University is. And Monsignor O'Flaherty I knew him very well as a child coming there, because in Limerick is where he went to Munchins, Mungret College, which would be part of that, Mungret, where he studied. So he would have known my family very well in Limerick. We're a seafaring family is what we are. And Cúchonach McGuire would have been the last of my family to own from Manillochern and the River Shannon, the estuary of the Shannon there at Foynes. So they would all know each other over the years. And what happened then was that in 1950, there was such goodwill for the people. So I remember it well. And I remember the people coming down to our offices in Arthur's Quay, Francis Street, you know.
Yeah.
And these elderly people in tears and going and talking to my father and, you know, coming around talking to me and that, and thanking the IRB and the Sovereign Republic of Ireland that they had established by the will and wish of all the people of the 32 counties, you know, for saving their fathers and their grandfathers. Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty and T.J. Kiernan and Delia, they saved thousands and thousands of people, all nationalities, you know, British, Jews, Germans, there are a whole lot of them, all those, and they were, you see, the diplomatic corps in the Vatican, they were all at war with one another, and the only ones that weren't at war were the Irish and our sovereign government, because we were a neutral country, and we were the only ones that were, you know, acceptable to the diplomatic corps. And then with Vaughan's Hotel and where we lived in Willowbank. Willowbank was chosen then in 1950, as I said. There was such goodwill for the Irish people in what they did during the war and saved so many people that Monsignor O'Flaherty, as I said, he was an IRB man. And he wanted the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process, because he founded that, the Pope in Rome, Pope Pius XII. And of course, Monsignor O'Flaherty was the one that was advising him. He was the one that was running the Vatican. He was the one that was doing all the work. And they brought my father and mother out to Rome in 1950. And Delia Murphy and T.J. Kiernan and that. And Canon Cooper. There was a lot of the clergy involved. As you know, in those days, the clergy were very, very, I mean, they had the power.
That's right.
And they were very important. You know, you couldn't do anything of the clergy. They had to say. But anyway, Pope Pius XII, he didn't want any violence against Britain. He wanted it through a university, the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. And my father gave Willowbank, where we lived, that big old house with beautiful gardens of that, right beside the River Shannon. And of course, I told you why the River Shannon is so important to us, the McGuires, which was their territory. And then what happened was that Brendan O'Regan, who was very friendly with Chuck Feeney, and he taught Chuck Feeney, you know, duty-free. And Chuck Feeney, of course, became a multi-millionaire out of that. And he put up the money for the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. And that's why the University of Limerick was founded. And things went haywire then after that. They never honoured it. My father died in 1964. You know, it was sad to see they changed the peace, reconciliation. The Good Friday Agreement is not a peace process. It's taking the Crown forces out of Ireland to fight in another part of the world. Now, it's a very welcome first step, is how I describe it. But there's no peace, reconciliation, or prosperity process here in Ireland at the moment.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM. Crossing the Rubicon.
The Provisional Government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irishmen and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which he receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her own military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army have patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself. She now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first of her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of the Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms, standing on that fundamental right and again asserting it in arms of the face of the world. We hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irishman and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally, and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from the majority in the past, until our arms have brought up the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. The Provisional Government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children, to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clarke, Sean McDiarmida, Thomas McDonough, P.H. Pearce, Eamon Cant, James Connolly, and Joseph Plunkett.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM. Crossing the Rubicon.
Our sovereignty comes from God, as I said, and that's what the old monks and friars were doing. And they were the universities at the time. And I mean, they were the ones who had to, in those days, mankind was in a very, I'm going back now a long time, starvation, and they didn't know how to preserve food. They had to learn all that. And it was the old monks learned that. Now, we're very old salt merchants, and we traded salt with the Roman Empire. And if you ever go to London, go down to McGuire Street and McGuire's Wharf. It's just down from Tower Bridge, and we were on the old London Bridge in 1200. So we've been going back a long time, seeing trade and that Gorham, the old fish paste and all that. And we were the business agents to the Spanish Empire, and they were married into the Duke of Alva's family. That's how they went down, the flight of the Earls and that. He got us down to Rome. And you see, Rome has always been very important. But having said all that, that was the background to peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. And unfortunately, the Free State government, they scrapped the whole thing. And I think it's shocking. And it was Hugh Coveney that got it Vaughan's Hotel. And the reason Willowbank was selected for the peace reconciliation process is what I was telling you about there, about Monsignor Flaherty, who was an IRB man, negotiating with the Supreme Council of the IRB. Sam McGuire brought all that intelligence to the Vaughan's Hotel every Saturday, and went back after that to his desk in the post office. And that's the background to it. When the Kyle gang were sent in here by, King George V to execute the sovereign Dáil government and that, I never hear these things. They had all that intelligence. I mean, I would have known Tom Barry very well. As I said, I would have known Monsignor O'Flaherty very well, T.J. Kieran and T.J. Murphy. All these people, I would have known Tom Barry, I would have known Joe McGrath, I would have known Bulmer Hobson and all, all these people. I knew Kathleen Clark. They were the ones who taught me. And as I said, in 1950, when they came back from Rome, Pope Pius XII, he didn't leave the Vatican in those days, but he sent the papal nuncio to St. Patrick's Church. You can imagine what it was like in St. Patrick's Church in 1950. The clergy were very, very powerful in those days. You can imagine the crowd of people then. And I was anointed as the president of the Irish Republican Brotherhood.
What age were you?
I was 7. And T.J. Kieran, his son, came up with me. We were only 7. But and all the members of the IRB would have laid their hands on my head at that stage. And that's what I've been doing since 1950. I kept that promise that I gave to the papal nuncio and to Pope Pius XII and to T.J. Kieran and B.D. Murphy and to Monsignor O'Flaherty and our own parish priest, which was, he was Canon Cooper, and Bishop Casey, he was the curate, and Paddy O'Regan was the other curate, that was Brendan O'Regan's brother. And they were all there, and all the clergy were there. They wanted all that information that we have in Loughgore. I mean, if you stand in Loughgore and you have, that famous painting, Salvador Mundi, the Saviour of the World, the two fingers, and I told you, if you stand on the road in Loughgore, in County Limerick, the largest stone, that's Old Grange. Well, we all know about New Grange, but nobody ever hears about Old Grange, which is much bigger, much older. And that was the sacred site that your ancestors, you're going back a long time. We're talking probably 40,000 years ago now.
Yeah.
And you go back to what they believed in, all in sovereignty and only all that knowledge and information. When you take those two 5-string harps, which run the Ark of the Covenant, we're talking about old Celtic Christianity now, not the Roman Christianity. That was changed. But the two, I said the harp is the covenant. It goes back to, I told you, the house of, to King David.
David, yeah.
The house of David. And that's where, it's man's intellect and reason and your 5 senses. And that's how it's Homo sapiens, the wise man. And you can understand that. Yeah. And you can understand this planet Earth and how it works and how many people can live in it. All mathematics, all science, all astronomy, latitude, longitude, sundial, compass wheel, they all come from that. And we're not taught anything about it. Those monasteries, they were all teaching all that, and that's where Ireland had that great knowledge and information. The Brendan voyage, that couldn't have happened either. It's all there. You can see it. You can see it in Askeaton. You can see it in Loughgore. You can see it. But Britain, the time when they were expanding, I said, up to then, we were the breadbasket for Britain. And it was Henry VIII then, he changed all that. And he declared himself that he was, King of Ireland, and that because he never was King of Ireland. And he was never a Protestant either. He was what everybody else had to be. But it's not Protestant or Catholic. It is corporation. And you are well aware of what a corporation is. They've no respect for anything or anybody. And the point I said to you about all those chocolate dollars that went to the sovereign Dáil government of 21st of January 1919 in the Mansion House, they all took the oath of allegiance to the Sovereign Republic of Ireland, the Sovereign Dáil government, the Sovereign Dáil courts, the War of Independence as a defence force, and be accountable to the sovereign people. Today, there's nobody taking the oath to the Sovereign Republic of Ireland. Dáil Éireann has never sat in Leinster House. Leinster House was purchased. It was from the Royal Dublin Society had a show there, and it was the Free State purchased it for the Free State government for the 26 counties on the 6th of December 1921 to pay for Britain's war debts and more pensions. That's what it's for. And why are you paying for that? You know, it's time that the politicians, they don't give their oath of allegiance, and either do the judges or anybody else. In the sovereign republic, you have to give an oath of allegiance, and the people are to be accountable to that sovereign Dáil Éireann government and to be accountable to the sovereign people. And you see what's happened. They don't want to be accountable. And that's corporation. Corporations are only, as we said, about money, making money, more money, and the more you have and the more you give them, the more they want. It's greed.
Yeah.
And all those politicians should be questioned. Where are you getting your sovereignty from? And our sovereign seal is 12 strings AD, and it has ERA underneath it. If it doesn't have that, that's what's on your passport, and that's the 21st of January 1919. That's what Monsignor O'Flaherty and the Supreme Council of the IRB, that's the sovereign Dáil Éireann government. That sovereign Dáil Éireann government doesn't owe any money and has no debt. Now, why are we paying off all this debt? And who are we paying it for? You know, when you don't even have it. And I think it's time that people ask their politician. And this is where the row was with... I've known Michael D. Higgins, and I've known him a long time.
Yeah.
He doesn't respect the IRB, and he has no, or any sovereignty, you know, and our proclamation, you never see him read. You never even hear it. Have you ever heard of a politician even referring to the Irish Republican Brotherhood? You know?
No.
They haven't. And they were the ones who founded it. And isn't that something very peculiar? And it's a 32-county mandate. All that territory was ratified on the 21st of January. I wrote, if you will read my letter there to Boris Johnson, and I wrote that, you know, our borders were down the Irish Sea with Britain, and it's from there to America, United States of America and Canada, because we brought sovereignty to America and Canada. We're the only country that went to those two countries. And that's all our territory, the largest in Europe. The most valuable territory, and the poorest people in Europe are, no matter we're poor, that's because we're paying off Britain's war debts. The 6th of December 1921, when they imposed the Free State and a monarchist government to pay for Britain. It's there. That document is up on BillyMcGuire.com if you want to read any of those. That's where you get them. And but anyway, to make it, you know, I don't want to be going on too much, but that's the conflict, and that peace and reconciliation and prosperity process that never happened. And Chuck Feeney put up all that money. What happened to all that money that was put up? They gutted Willowbank, Free State, and they gutted Vaughan's Hotel, where the state was founded. And that was Hugh Coveney, Simon Coveney's father. And, you know, I think it's shocking. And when the Queen came, because that was part, it took 10 years. The Earl of Harrington took his seat with the Presbyterian people, because their abbey is on the corner there, Finlayter's old church there. She was supposed to announce, that's what the peace, reconciliation and prosperity was, that she was going to announce that she and her government had recognized the 1918 32 county election. There will never be peace in Ireland until that's done. That's the conflict. It's still the conflict for 100 years. I think it is an absolute scandal, and that's not acceptable. And I wrote that letter to Michael D. Higgins because on St. Patrick's Day, 1858, James Stephens, having walked 3,000 miles around Ireland to set up the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and John O'Mahony setting up the Fenian Brotherhood, the sister organization in Dohenys in America. Only for America we wouldn't have our independence today. They supported us. And a lot of people, and as I said, the goodwill for that peace, reconciliation and prosperity process. And I told you about all those people, all nationalities coming over to Willowbank, to my father's office, in tears, thanking them for saving their fathers and their grandfathers from starvation and brutality and all the awfulness of war. But anyway, on St. Patrick's Day this year, we were complying with COVID-19, and our secretary John, who's brilliant. I mean, we're only volunteers, and we're only giving the information out to the people. That's all we do. And we had 5 people going down to, as we do every year, 1858, 163 years. And Pierce Street Guard, I know the sergeant in Pierce Street, as I speak to him occasionally. And they knew very well we would be commemorating our 163rd anniversary of the founding of the Irish Republican Brotherhood by James Stephens.
Yeah.
And our volunteer had just read our 1916 proclamation. But now, I wasn't there because, as I said, we were complying with the COVID-19. You only had 5 people from Dublin, to do it.
Yeah.
And there were John and a few volunteers. And he just read our 1916 proclamation, which is a sacred document, which is the foundation document of the Sovereign Republic of Ireland.
Yeah.
But he was set upon and brutally attacked and sprayed with some pepper spray or something or other, I don't know. And he was taken down to Pierce Street Garden Barracks, and he was taken to court. And a Free State judge brought to a Free State judge's court. That is not acceptable. That's treason. And if you read the proclamation, that is treason. I couldn't let that go. It's a very sad day for me that I had to indict Michael D. Higgins for treason. It's time that all that stopped now. As I said, there was last Monday was the 100th anniversary and of the Free State. I mean, pretending that they're going to go on for another 100 years of mayhem, savagery, brutality, propaganda, lies and deception on our people. That's not on. And I think people should stand up and say, we have a sovereign government. All those, the sovereign seed of Dáil, all the harps, which are BC, and all the sovereign seals, the tricolour flag, the sovereign constitution, proclamation, declaration and address to the free nation. They're all Irish Republican Brotherhood documents and memorabilia. And that's our tricolour flag that flies in Europe. And, I mean, that must be respected. And they must tell the truth in Europe. And it's what we have a unique history and a wonderful history. And the people aren't allowed to know anything about it. And that's what the University of Limerick, and that's what the peace, reconciliation and prosperity process was going to teach. Because I brought out Rowan O'Donnell to Lough and I showed him that. It's old, the Stone Circle. And all those professors of mathematics and that, all mathematics, it all comes from that, the 2 5-string harps.
They do.
And your intellect and reasons how you understand it. If you stand and you face the sun and you put your left hand up in the air, your 5 fingers will say on that left hand, and you put up your right one, 5 fingers on the right one. And you get your thumb and your 3rd finger, and that leaves you with your index finger and your 2nd finger, 3rd finger, as a V. They're the harp signs, and you put the left one up in the air, the sun grows all your food and all your biomass. And the moonship then is for the other, on your right hand. And you put your right hand over the left hand, the 2 V's over that, and you have a perfect harp. You are born in the image of God. And that's where that comes from. And you see priests at Mass. You see the Pope in Rome. You see in even the Presbyterian people, and you see the Protestant people. They still all use that. When they put their hands up, that's what it is. That's where that's coming from. That's coming from the heart. The covenant between God and man with all the information for his planet Earth and our civilization. But we have to manage our own civilization. And that's where it comes from. And all that mathematics are on that measuring tape. The first string is the measuring tape, plumb line, straight edge. It's the golden thread. And you put those two harps together and you have the grid and the graph. You have latitude, you have longitude, and all those. They're all in Lochar. They're all down in Askeaton in the pyramids as well. In the Friary. They're probably in all the friaries around Ireland. And that was the reason Sir Nicholas Mallory, he burnt that friary because Britain did not want people to have that knowledge and information. And that's why it was burnt down. But it's opened up again and you can go there. And if you go to Billy McGuire, John Pendergast, we did that. And then there's a lovely little garden of remembrance in Askeaton between the Abbey. And it was the castle there is you see, he was over Lochar and the Earl of Desmond. But the Earl of Thomond as well, they were all involved in that and that knowledge and information. And Cromwell, he sent his troops to Lochar, and Ireton was his son-in-law. And they defaced a lot of those stones that had all that information on them. All those stones still have that. And all mathematics, all science, all astronomy, the sundial, the compass and wheel, they all come from that. And there's the Skellig monks going in and out of that. They had all that knowledge. That's why Christopher Columbus came to Askeaton for that information. He couldn't have gone to, it wouldn't have been America in those days, but as America. But look at the Brendan voyage. They had all that knowledge and information. And why aren't we allowed to have that knowledge and information? You see all the young people today, and you hear of them, suicide, and you hear drugs and everything. If they had that knowledge and information, they wouldn't have half that, and you'd understand this planet Earth instead of just the corporation all the time. The more you give them, the more they want, and you owned your house and your land because you're the sovereign. And even though they would take your house, let them take each brick and the slates, the lot, but you still own the land underneath. And that's where the corporations, everybody has to have a license to trade in this country. And if you have a license, then you own your house and your land. You have a passport with the 12 strings with air underneath it. You can't go into another country without that because you're a sovereign citizen. And that's what the IRB set up. A sovereign republic of Éire, and that's where it comes from.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM. Crossing the Rubicon.
Have I gone on too long?
No, I've a couple of questions I want to ask you. One is if you can just tell the listeners about the turning of the seal and Independence Day.
Well, we talked about the 1918 32 county election, and that's the conflict between the Sovereign Republic of Éire and that. And you go back to the Crown of England, we say Henry VIII. When you see up in the coat of arms of the Crown of England, you see our sovereign seal. What are they doing with our sovereign seal up in the coat of arms? We don't respect it. And it's time all those things were sorted out. But the turning of the sovereign seal, that goes back to Lochar. We only had a winter and summer solstice, 6 months calendar, where the Egyptians had a 12 months calendar. And if you go to Rome, to Termini, and you see, and all those old Celtic churches, you see there's a hole up in the wall. And they couldn't determine, and the most important day in the Roman Catholic Church is when Christ arose and went into heaven.
Yeah. And
how do you determine Easter Sunday if you don't have any mathematics? Now, the Egyptians had a 12 months calendar. But we had a 6 months and a 6 months, the winter and summer solstice. That's how we measure from that. And if you go to Termini, and all those old Celtic churches, for the saints and that, the window of the high altar would be placed where the sun would come in on that day. So that would tell the people. So the Easter Sunday then was calculated, had all sorts of methods of doing it, firing cannons and doing all sorts of extraordinary things. But it wasn't mathematics, and they're all based from the harp. And the whole, if you look at the harp, the base of the harp, that's the hub of the wheel. It's also where all that calculations are based on. The end of the harp, you see the little piece there if you're looking at it, and the sun would come in and run along the floor, and they would calculate then Easter Sunday was the first full moon after that. Those calculations are from Lockyer. They're there in Lockyer as well today for anybody who wants to go and study them. And to think that we have them and nobody knows anything about them. And I said about Cromwell tempting these groups there. They wanted to get rid of everything Irish. We were only going to be slaves and serfs for them and reduce the food for their crown forces and the Royal Navy. Mm-hmm. That's what they did. And Ireton was Cromwell's son-in-law, and he executed Bishop O'Brien. Bishop O'Brien put the curse of Cromwell on him. And he said, you'll only last 40 days. You only lasted 8 days. All these things. And they got the Psalter, which is the Book of Psalms. And the harp is the covenant, the harp. And that would, stringing that. And that you see King David playing the harp, and you see him with the Psalter. The Psalter is very important. That's what those, you see, the harp is only one image, but the 2 5-stringed harps that we talk about was on your bar. If you take a coin out of your pocket, 14 strings that the Irish Republican Brotherhood put on Ernest Blythe, put on the money, and put it up to the mirror, you see the harp of the Psalter. That's 2 images, which are very important. And over the forecourts, I think that's an absolute scandal to think the Free State would deliberately do that and deliberately put a gold braiding round our tricolor flag. It's not, of course, then it's 4th colour, and call themselves Dáil Éireann. Dáil Éireann has never sat in Leinster House. Dáil Éireann sat in the Mansion House, and he's a 32 county member. And the turning of the sovereign seal is always on. I turn it 7 times a year, and that's where it comes from. And that's what's so important. And it gives all the mathematics.
And where do you turn that 7 times a year?
Well, I'm turning it here now because of COVID. I turn it on the 21st of January in the Mansion House in Dublin, our Independence Day. Mm-hmm. I turn it, on St. Patrick's Day because the Irish Republican Brotherhood were founded on St. Patrick's Day. Winter and summer solstice, I turn it then, and I turn it on Easter Sunday as well. And all those days are so important for the Irish Republican Brotherhood. And that's all part of our Celtic Christianity. Yeah. And that's to do with looking after planet Earth. There'll be enough food for people. People, you have to learn all these things. And that's what the old monks were doing. Teaching, breeding all the plants and teaching for farming and, all that. And calendars and writing, and you learn to write. Look at the harp, the sun box, the sound box, the grid and the graph. Everything's on that. The sundial, compass wheel, and the wheel, that curved side, if you continue that around, that's the wheel, that's given to mankind, Homo sapiens, and the strings are spokes, and that the little piece at the end of it, that's where the axle fits into that. Yeah. That man can travel the world, and that's where the wheel comes from. It's all there, and we have all that information, and we're not allowed to, because Britain doesn't allow us.
The question,
controlling it.
One of the things, to the listeners, there's a great book that I read there a while back, and that book is how the Irish monks saved civilization. And what they did was, when they went across, when Europe was being sacked, they went across and got all the manuscripts and they wrote them out in Ireland. And even if they disagreed with something, they still wrote it out what it was. And they might have put a note at the end going, I disagree with this, or but I'm still continuing on what it says.
That's it.
Yeah, and they did
Well,
that.
you see, that's an important link to what I was talking about, the peace reconciliation in the Vatican in Rome, because all that is interlinked.
Yeah.
And I told you why Willowbank was chosen was because Monsignor O'Flaherty had negotiated at the Supreme Council in Vaughan's Hotel, which is 29 Parnell Square in Granby Row. And when the Queen came over that time, you know, for the state visit, she was supposed to announce that she had recognised in her government the sovereign of the 1918 32 county election. But Hugh Coveney, the Free State, had got at Vaughan's Hotel, and there was an unmerciful row of the whole thing. And then when Michael D. Higgins went to Windsor for the state dinner, for all those others, she was to announce, I don't know what happened that night, but she was to announce that night. And the extraordinary thing is I couldn't meet the Queen when she came here because the Queen didn't have sovereignty. It's royalty she has. She doesn't have sovereignty. And I wasn't allowed to meet her. You know, isn't that quite extraordinary?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but I mean, it's all lies and deception and fraud and pretending and that you're doing this. But that's where the confusion. Look at the confusion in the world today. It is scandalous. There's no need for that. You know.
Tell me this, Billy. Tell us about Guinnesses and the Rothschilds sending money.
Well, I will. That's part of the Truth Commission that was set up for that peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. And it was supposed to be a truth commission. And in 1912, on top of my head now, because I'm doing this all out of the top of my head, I'm not having enough dates in this review.
Yeah.
But the Ulster Volunteers were founded, and they became the UVF Army when Guinness's, Lord Rothschild, and Rupert Kipling. Guinness's gave 100,000, Lord Rothschild gave 100,000. And Rupert Kipling gave 50,000 to buy the top-class German guns. And they were armed, and that's where the UVF Army comes from. And that has caused the mayhem, savagery, and brutality in Northern Ireland ever since. And as a consequence of the Ulster Volunteers being set up, the Irish Volunteers had to be set up as a consequence of that. Yeah. And that's what they come out with. But all that was supposed to be part of the peace, reconciliation, and prosperity process. But to me, we've had, you know, all those presidents. Why didn't they take that to, you know, the courts in the Hague, the war criminal courts, and get all that sorted out there and then? If they didn't do, why doesn't Michael D. Higgins take it there? Why didn't he take Guinness's Lord Rothschild and Rupert Kipling and get it sorted out? That's what you do. That's what civilized countries do. No, they don't do that. They only look after themselves. I'm told that Michael D. Higgins is on something, I don't know whether this is correct or not. He's on $250,000 a year salary. What's he being paid for? You know, all Free State money. You know, the whole thing is rotten, and it's rotten to the core. If that's what the people want to do and want to keep on. But it's your children and your grandchildren. And I think the time will come when your children and your child will make the parents account for the carry-on and the fraud that's gone on in this country. It is scandalous. We don't have to have that. We have a sovereign Ireland government. We believe in God and our land and we could have a wonderful way of life, which we used to have. But what's the way of life
it is
today?
I tell you, I know we're taking a lot out of you here, talking about this, and there's a couple of things I just want to ask you. Which there's three things I want to ask you. First one is Independence Day. So, if you can explain to our listeners that we have an Independence Day, when it is, and so on.
Well, as I said, the 21st of January 1919, when the Supreme Council of the IRB and in Vaughan's Hotel and the Mansion House in Dublin, and the sovereign Ireland government, ratified the 1918 32 county election. That's the mandate we have, and that's our Independence Day. And it includes all that territory from down the Irish Sea right to America. That is some territory, I can tell you. And where is America getting their sovereignty from? I've asked that question. Where are all these Commonwealth countries, they don't have sovereignty. It's royalty they have.
Yeah.
They pretend it's sovereignty, but it isn't. You can't be dishonest and corrupt like that. Either you have sovereignty or you don't have it. We know very well where our sovereignty came out. You can read it all there in the 1916 proclamation. I mean, Pearse and all these people, these were all literally people. These were all highly intellectual people. Bulwer Hobson and all. I knew Bulwer Hobson very well, and I knew all these people. Tom Barry and all those. And look at James Stevens and John O'Mahony. I mean, they taught in France. And they had to go, they were the 48. And William Smith O'Brien, there's a statue to William Smith O'Brien in O'Connell Street in Dublin. And we celebrate St. Patrick's Day. That's the reason why we celebrate, because the Irish Republic Brotherhood and the Fenian Brotherhood were founded on St. Patrick's Day. Did you ever hear RTE even mentioning that when they're showing the parade going down O'Connell Street?
No,
they
never.
Passed by William Smith O'Brien's statue, and they wouldn't stop. And he was one of the founders of the IRB.
But the IRB set up, they put in the funding for the elections.
They put in the funding, they did all that, and now it's just been ripped off as it was then. And the people are being ripped off because the more you work for a corporation, your children are enslaved to that corporation.
We understand that, yeah. I'm looking at history and I'm noticing that everything is PLC, and I'm even now examining documents that come from the revenue commissioners or somewhere else that it doesn't have the era under it with
it can't.
Yeah.
It can't. It's a free state.
Yeah.
But they're trying to pretend that it's a sovereign dollar-area government. It's not a sovereign dollar. It's a free state government. Well, then I've had ructions with the European Union over this in 2016. Yeah. And on the 16th of March, 2017, when Queen Elizabeth signed Article 50 of Brexit, she abdicated any claim she had on the Free State or on the Sovereign Republic of Eire. And I've asked, if you read my letter to Boris Johnson telling him that he has, that our territory is from down the Irish Sea, he had no other choice of only doing that because other countries would have come in. But you have to have, if you have sovereignty, anybody can come in and take everything you have.
That's true.
And that's what's important. That's your proof you owned your land and your house and that you are entitled to go here and there. If you're a slave, you don't have that. Corporations, they couldn't care less. They don't have any of that. It's only greed and money, and that's what they want.
May I ask you a question then?
You can.
If it is a free state and it's not a sovereign republic, what is the Oireachtas?
It's the Royal Oireachtas under the Crown of England. That's what it is.
Okay.
But we have a sovereign dollar. That's why you said, on the 21st of January, every year, I go to the Mansion House and I keep that alive. If I didn't keep that alive, it would be gone. And you would find no claim. If you don't keep that going, that's your claim. That is a sovereign dollar and government. We still have it. And that's what we do.
And can that be done? Can that be done outside the Leinster House, or does it have to be done inside?
Well, we used to do it in Leinster House. One time we were allowed in, but we're not allowed in anymore.
So we do it outside.
Because the Free State doesn't want. See, they're pretending they're a sovereign government. Michael Higgins pretends he's president of Ireland. No, he's not president of Ireland. He's president of the Royal Oireachtas in the 26 counties, and that's bloody well it. We can tell. But I mean, if you want to keep fooling people all the time. Sometimes you can cod some of the people some of the time, but you can't cod all the people all the time.
Well, that's
and he should stand up and make a statement. We do not want another 100 years of mayhem, even though he's a multimillionaire now out of being president and all his fees that he got. He's done well, and he should have the decency. His father fought for and was a great person in the War of Independence. And suffered an awful lot, and fought for the Sovereign Republic of Eire. And I think it's scandalous that he won't stand up. Either, why didn't Mary McAleese and Mary Robinson take Guinness's Rothschild and move to the court in the Hague? They're supposed to be, these top-class intellects and the law, and they have this, and they're supposed to be that, senior councils and all that. And no, they looked after themselves. That's what they did. They didn't look after our people. And we have to look after them. That's what the IRB do. You know, all that land that you got, the farmers taking, dividing all those estates. And that's, you told me, I think you live out in Wicklow. Look at Coolatin, 85,000 acres to grow the food for the British, the Crown Forces and the Royal Navy. And it was sent to Canada. Now, I must say, they did get, I think, 200 acres, or were offered 200 acres. But 85,000 acres of land, and all that, those oak woods, they built the cathedrals in Britain. They built all their ships and everything at the time. And that's what Ireland was about. They had no regard. All that information that Britain got for the seas and latitude and longitude, they got it from here.
Yeah.
And that's the conflict between Ireland and Britain. And that should be, and until that's sorted out, there'll never be peace in Ireland.
Okay.
And people would ask the questions.
I have a question for you. You sent, and we're going to get this read out, but you sent a sealed letter to the president with a black seal.
Excuse me now. I'll correct you. The provisional president.
The provisional, yes, the provisional
that's
president.
That's better.
Mr. Higgins.
I wish he was, but he isn't.
Yeah. And in that letter, we'll have that read out if people want to listen.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM. Crossing the Rubicon.
Irish Republican Brotherhood. You have been indicted for treason by the Irish Republican Brotherhood under their 1916 proclamation, the foundation document of the state, the Sovereign Republic of Éire, and the democratic wishes of the sovereign Irish citizens who gave the Irish Republican Brotherhood the mandate in the 1918 32-county Democratic All-Ireland election called by the British government on the 14th of December 1918. I or B political wing Sinn Féin won 73 seats out of 105 seats on the 28th of December 1918 and was ratified in the Mansion House, Dublin. And GHQ Vaughan's Hotel, Dublin by the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Government, the Sovereign Republic of Éire, all 32 counties, territories and seas, on the 21st of January 1919, our Independence Day. On the 17th of March 2021, the Irish Republican Brotherhood were commemorating their 163rd anniversary at 16 Lombard Street, Dublin. Our volunteer had just read our 1916 proclamation when he was pepper sprayed and assaulted by An Garda Síochána after reading our 1916 proclamation and taken to Pearse Street Garda Station and charged in court by a Free State judge. The IRB were complying with COVID-19 regulations. And An Garda Síochána at Pearse Street Garda Station were all aware that the IRB were commemorating their 163rd anniversary of the founding by James Stephens of the IRB at 16 Lombard Street, Dublin, as they do every year since 1858 on St. Patrick's Day. The Irish Republican Brotherhood's 1916 proclamation clearly states, Irish men and Irish women in the name of God. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. We place that cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. The Sovereign Constitution. This Constitution shall be the Constitution of the Republic of Ireland, proclaimed in arms on Easter Monday, April the 24th, 1916, and established by the will and wishes of all the people of Ireland on January the 21st, 1919, our Independence Day. All authority in Ireland, legislative, executive, judicial, and all powers of government are derived solely under God from the people of Ireland. These powers are inherent in the people alone, by virtue of their sovereignty. They must be exercised in accordance with the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all. Any legislation not in accordance with these principles is hereby declared to be null and void. The conflict with the British for the last 100 years is the Crown of England and the British government refuse to recognise, respect and honour the legitimacy of the 1918 32 All-Ireland democratic election called by the British government on the 14th of December 1918. King George V and his British government declared the Sovereign Dáil Éireann to be an illegal assembly and sent his Cairo gang to Dublin to execute and annihilate the Sovereign Dáil Éireann government, democratically elected by the will and wishes of all the people, citizens of Éire, all 32 counties and all members of the IRB. And on Bloody Sunday, the British Crown Forces opened fire on our sovereign people, citizens of Croke Park, Dublin, and killed 14 innocent people. Vaughan's Hotel papers, source Sam McGuire intelligence reports. Your contempt, hostility and dirty tricks that you've played on me as the anointed president of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, IRB, is unjust and unfair to me as I carry out the mandate by the will and the wishes of the sovereign Irish people that gave the IRB political wing Sinn Féin in 1918, 32 county All-Ireland election of the 14th of December 1918 and won 73 seats out of 105 seats on the 28th of December 1918 and ratified by the Sovereign Dáil Éireann government on the 21st of January 1919, our Independence Day, in the Mansion House, Dublin, GHQ Vaughan's Hotel, Dublin, and established by the Sovereign Republic of Éire and the 5 Free State Provisional Government cannot use the Irish Republic Brotherhood Sovereign Seal of Dáil Éireann, 12 strings, AD Sultry, or any of the IRB's Sovereign Seal or Harp BC, or our Sovereign Tricolour flag of green, white and orange, or the IRB's 1916 Proclamation, or the 1919 Sovereign Constitution, or Declaration of Independence, or address to the free nations of the world under pain of death, and all appointments and legislation and use of the Sovereign Seal of the Dáil Éireann are all now null and void. The Irish Republican Brotherhood will lease their Sovereign Republic of Éire to a sovereign state that will comply with the 1918 32 county All-Ireland democratic election. All our sovereign 32 counties, all our sovereign territory, the largest in European Union, and all the sovereign seas from its border down to the Irish Sea to its border with the United States of America and Canada until the peace, reconciliation and prosperity process that was founded in the 1950s by Pope Pius XII, Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, IRB, and the Ambassador P.J. Kiernan and his wife, Delia Murphy, and my late father, Martin W. McGuire, and is restored, there is no peace, reconciliation or prosperity process in the Sovereign Republic of Éire today. The IRB want the conflict between the Sovereign Republic of Éire and the British to be restored once and for all. The IRB, who founded and funded the state of the Sovereign Republic of Éire, wants the British government and the Crown to recognise, honour and respect the mandate that was given to us in the 1918 democratic 32 All-Ireland election and set in place the peace, reconciliation and prosperity agreement started by Pope Pius XII in the 1950s. The IRB do not want another 100 years of mayhem, brutality, savagery, propaganda, lies and deception forced upon its people.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
And you sent that letter.
I did.
And there was an acknowledgement of receipt of that letter.
There is.
But what, from that letter, like, what do people do? Do people write letters to the...
No, they don't. They don't have to do anything. The point of that, it's a very sad day for me that I have to indict Michael D. Higgins as the Provisional Free State President. And I told you what it was. I explained to you about St. Patrick's Day. And if you read our proclamation, for reading our proclamation, that our volunteer was brought to court and charged by a Free State judge for reading our 1916 proclamation on our 163rd anniversary. He's responsible for the Garda Síochána, according to himself. But where are they getting their sovereignty from?
But the question...
You have to have sovereignty.
The question I'm asking, like, you wrote this letter, you've sent it there, but people need to ask questions. Like, do people get in touch with the Defence Force? Do they get in touch with the top level in Garda
and say... They do. You do not... If a guard stops you on the road, would you ever ask him, please, guard, and he'll ask you for your... Can I see your licence, please, sir, or madam? And you say, you can, of course, there's my licence, and there's your licence with the sovereign seal in it. And I ask him, can I see your licence now? He has to have a licence. as a judge has to have a license. And don't go into court unless you write to the court clerk and ask him to see his license and his oath of allegiance to the state. And he doesn't have it. And he has to account to you because you're the sovereign. And do not, and any of those civil servants or anything else you want to see, if you get something from the civil servants on any of the departments, and it doesn't have air underneath the seal, they cannot use that seal. And it's null and void now. It's not legal, valid, or bona fides. And don't be given a judge if you go into court and you don't ask the judge to see his oath of allegiance, and is it to the Free State he's given that oath of allegiance, or is it to the sovereign Dalton government, which is it, one or the other, and see his oath, then you ask him if he can't hear your case. Because if you write into him, but once you go in that door, he claims jurisdiction over you, and that's Free State. So you're going on and you're giving away your sovereignty. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, to the corporation. To the corporation.
You're giving it to the corporation. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
They have to account to you every year all the assets of the state, and they're not doing it, and they don't want to do it. You know, it's just shocking what's going on. And it's going to get worse.
Like, how do we change this?
It's just easy change. It's just easier for you. You cannot trade here. I saw the other day where was it a vulture fund or something, or buying up houses. And how can the vulture? If you read Article 10 of the Sovereign Constitution, the land of Ireland belongs to the citizens of Ireland and to them alone. Are they citizens of Ireland or them alone? And under the Sovereign Constitution, they're not. It's like the judges. Where is your oath of allegiance? Is it to the Sovereign Republic of Ireland that all those chocolate dollars gave on the 21st of January 1919? The Sovereign Ireland government, the Sovereign Ireland courts, the War of Independence as a defence force, and be accountable to the sovereign people. And one of them giving it today. Because they're interested in the money, and you don't ask them or question them. They want more and more and more of your money. That's what it is.
I asked people this question, and I said, "Look, does a bank have a license here?" And they said, "No." But they say
not one bank has a license. They said not one bank has a license.
Yes,
because only the IRB can give you a license.
But
and I haven't given a license to anybody.
And here it is that they said, yeah, but it's regulated by the central bank. But who does the regulation for the central bank? Is that the Britain? Okay.
Britain does the regulation, yeah. Okay. That's who does it. And that's where what did I say on the 6th of December 1921? To pay for Britain's war debts and war pensions.
Yeah.
That's what you're paying for. The Sovereign Republic of Ireland doesn't know any money. Why are you paying out all that? We should have the best schools, the best housing, a sovereign dollar, all our land, everything, a happy people, living life properly, and we don't have it. And why? Because you're giving it all away.
Is it as easy as people just start wanting to know answers to questions? Is that how easy it is? It's just people. That's
how easy it is. Are you sovereign or are you not? Or are you a slave? If you're not sovereign, you're a slave.
And who do they ask these questions to? Like, if someone's listening to this today, right?
Your local politician, you have to ask him, what oath of allegiance are you giving?
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
And I mean, if you'd like to talk about Mary Lou MacDonald, I know Mary Lou MacDonald, and we were in the round room the last time I was in Dublin before COVID, and she was in there. She is not president of Sinn Féin. She's president of Provisional Sinn Féin, which is a Free State for Sinn Féin, And she could very easily, all she has to do is go down to the round room in the Mansion House and take the oath of allegiance to the Sovereign Republic of Ireland. And she's president of it. I've asked her many times, and she won't do it. And she came out the other day on was it Monday or whatever day it was, on RT television, and she referred to two sovereign governments, Britain and Ireland, sovereign governments. They don't even recognise. Britain doesn't have sovereignty, and our crowd don't recognise the sovereign government. That's the tragedy of it. We have a sovereign government. by the will and way. That's what I keep going, and that's what we keep alive every year on the 21st of January since 1919. And that's what we do, and that's the oath I gave. But when I'm gone old now, when I'm gone, who's going to do it? And I don't see any Pope anointing another IRB person. There's lots of people trying to take over the IRB and pretend they're this and pretend they're that, but it's all about money for themselves. That's what it's about, not for the people. Ours is for the people.
It is,
our people are sovereign. And you should have the benefit of the assets of the state.
But what happens then?
Is that happening?
But what happens when, you're of your elder years?
I am in my elder years.
Yeah, and what happens then, in the next 10 years?
They'll have a great... Look, they intend to continue on as usual. They'll all enrich themselves, but you'll be poorer and you'll be doing it for them. But your children won't. I mean, what is the future for your children? Nothing. A job. I mean, it was Brendan O'Regan and it was the IRB went and negotiated all those factories and things that were built in Shannon and all over the place to give people. That's what a sovereignty does, and that's what look after our people. But they get so corrupt.
Yeah, it's greed.
They don't want to be accountable.
I always say to people, if you're making a decision, never make the decision about going, what's in it for me, myself and I, but make that decision for what is it in for the greater good. And when you can remove yourself from a decision, then you see the true value and the true leadership. That's really what it is. But
that's what it is.
And some people here are going to say, to me, hang on, if Sinn Féin is, part of this provisional Sinn Féin and they're in the Dáil, but they won't go into Westminster. Is it,
Which the whole thing is, isn't it? I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
No, you couldn't. It's
total confusion for everybody, and that's how Britain keeps it. They want to keep it like that. Divide and conquer. That the Irish people don't know that. They don't know, and they don't. Did you ever meet anyone who knew the difference between sovereignty and royalty?
No.
Did you ever hear them talking about the IRB?
No.
You ever talking about the sovereign dollar and go? They pretend, you see. They pretend. Michael D pretends he's president of. He likes to pretend that and he gets a fine salary for pretending that he's president of Ireland. But it's only 26 counties. That's not Ireland. Ireland is a sovereign 32 counties. And that's what that election was.
I know there's a huge connection between yourselves and India, and that's why they have our flag. But I'm sure India knows this.
Our flag. Well, that was President Geary. He was the fourth president of India, and he was here, I think it was 1912 off the top of my head. And he was a member of the IRB. He was a member of Sinn Féin and Old Mahern. And he was studying law, and India's independence came out of that. They couldn't unite the people. It was the GAA. That's true. The IRB founded the GAA. And you go back to John Francis McGuire of the Cork Examiner. He was a brilliant man. And they found the GAA was the backbone of our independence. But India had nothing like that. But as I said, we were one of the oldest salt merchants on record. We still are. But India couldn't unite the people. But in India, being a very hot country, you have to have salt to preserve the food. And Britain was known as the Liverpool salt tax on the Indian people. And that was the only way the people united against Britain putting that. That's how they got their independence. And that was the Liverpool, and that all came out of Vaughan's Hotel. Because remember, we were I met President Geary when I was a child in Willowbank. I always remember him. And he said, Classy, he said, remember, he said this. And I always remember, and I was only a very young child. He said, remember Plassey, he said, we lost India at the Battle of Plassey, but we found it at Plassey again, he said, and at Vaughan's Hotel. It was lovely.
Yeah.
But, and they always, they used to come to the Mansion House every year because it was so important. And the Free State decided they wouldn't let the IRB into the Mansion House anymore. And they put security on. And we were only allowed, I don't know whether it was 10 people or 5 people or something to the round room and the Mansion House.
I know.
We did it at the dining room, that is the cabinet room, the dining room. And I said to the person at the door, the security, I said, look, somebody from the Indian embassy will be coming. And I said, make sure he's welcome in, that he's allowed in. And he looked at me. And that Indian person came, and they wouldn't let him in the door. I think that's shocking. He wouldn't do it. They didn't. They just want, it's like Michael D. Higgins and sending the Garda Síochána around to arrest our volunteer for reading our proclamation. That's all part of it. They want to get rid of all that. They're so happy to be corporations
be part
and
of
getting
Europe.
all the salary and living the wonderful life and that you're paying for. That's what it's about. And if you think it's otherwise, it's not.
Billy, we'll wrap up. I know I've taken nearly over an hour of your time.
Oh, have you?
We have. And,
but anyway,
but look,
I hope it's of interest to you.
Oh, it is. Look, the one thing is, what's next after you've completed that letter, and that's gone to Higgins. So what happens next after that? He's received that.
Well,
does he ignore it?
He probably ignores it and hopes that why should he do anything about it? He's very well paid. He's living a wonderful life. And he couldn't possibly afford it with anybody else. And he's a very free state government. And what is his oath? I mean, and you don't actually see the seals, they pretend. They never show you those things. They never read the proclamation. They never read anything to do with it.
But even his seal in Europe, the red wax seal doesn't even have the ERA sign underneath it. It's just a heart.
Britain.
Yeah.
If he puts that on it, the Crown of England, they could execute him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he can't use it as far as we're concerned because they belong to the IRB. And if that's our seal up on the coat of arms, are we then the sovereign government of Britain? This is the question that the Queen will have to start answering. Are we the sovereign government then of Britain? Because they have our sovereign seal up. That's what Henry VIII put up.
Yeah.
He claimed that he was. See, Henry VII was only Lord of Ireland. Henry VIII claimed, and he put the money on. He put ours. He said the Pope in Rome gave him permission to use our sovereign seal. The Pope, that's more lies and deception. The Pope, how could the Pope in Rome give Henry VIII the sovereignty of God and the covenant between God and man with all the information for his planet Earth and our civilization? I mean, these are just propaganda, lies and deception. And improve those things. They should prove it. Why are we telling all this bloody lies? No wonder the world is in chaos. If you can't tell the truth and the facts, you bring it back to what it is and what something is. And you see the coat of arms. And does that mean that every case in the law, it's over their courts, that the sovereign Ireland government, or the will and wish of all the people in the 1980s, is the sovereignty? And I can tell you something. That I know General de Gaulle, because I know when Britain wanted to, when we were joining because before they had the EU, I forgot the name, but General de Gaulle wouldn't allow Britain into Europe because they didn't have a sovereign government. And that's why, and they got into the European Union under our sovereignty. Does that mean today that all that territory and everything else is belong to the Sovereign Republic of Ireland?
Wow.
But it's up in their coat of arms.
Yeah, it's interesting because, if this is, I'm sure all the governments in Europe know this story. And,
of course.
And do they use that then as a bargaining chip?
Now you're honest. Isn't that what Boris Johnson? The reason they came out the other day to have this for another 100 years is that they can use Sovereign Republic of Ireland as a bargaining chip. They use the 6 counties as a bargaining chip to get more deals out of Europe. That's the name of the game. That's what it's about. They couldn't care less about the 6 counties or anybody else. They want to get as much as they can out of Europe, and they're going to use the 6 counties to get it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I wonder, does the other European governments use us and
They
go into our fishing waters and all, and kind of go,
do.
oh well, look,
But I have said in that letter that with the IRB you're going to lease the Sovereign Republic of Eire and all our territory. Well, it's just take, for example, suppose I lease it to China. China will not allow anybody into our waters.
God, I hope you don't.
And they'll have it down the Irish Sea. They'll have a navy down along there. And you will not get in if you're not only Irish people. And that sovereign people will get in. And right to America. America will be delighted. It's scandalous to think what's going on.
Well,
happen.
I think that China would be the worst to lease it to.
Well, there you are. No, but just take it for. I'm only giving you an example.
Oh yeah.
Sure, India could be, but they would not tolerate any of this rubbish that's going on. You'd have to have your sovereignty, and that's the end of that. And that's what General de Gaulle wouldn't allow them in. They waited until he died and used our sovereignty to get into Europe. And they're the facts of the matter.
Billy, look, the last one, people listen to this and this will, create, I know people will go, oh my God, I understand this, and they'll absorb it and they'll try and figure it out and they'll do some research. I'll ask this again because there's people asking me, what can they do as sovereign citizens of Eire? What can they do?
You have to behave like one. First of all, if you're a politician, what oath of allegiance is he taking? Is it to the 6 counties? Or is it the sovereign Dáil government by the will and wish of all the people? That's where you're sovereignty about it.
Yeah.
If you go to court, ask the judge. You write to the judge, you write to his court clerk and ask him that you intend to have your case heard under the sovereign constitution. And you want to see his license. And you want to see his oath of allegiance. And you want to see the court clerk's license. But if you go, no matter where you go, if you're going to any departments, go into your bank and say, when you write out a check, you see the heart, but you don't see any air underneath. And ask them, where are they getting their sovereignty from?
But even the vulture funds, that have come in here as well, they don't have a license to trade.
But they're not sovereign.
Yeah.
You don't, corruption isn't part of sovereignty, that's the opposite.
No.
And you ask your civil servants, I told you what, if you met a car that stops you, you ask them. And if you keep on asking these questions, they're going to have to do it. Because all that money that people have got in the Free State, illegally, fraudulently, has to be paid back.
Yeah.
To the sovereign people.
Yeah, we owe nothing to nobody as a sovereign country.
No, the IRB, I told you, the Sovereign Republic of Eire doesn't owe any money and has no debt. And no matter what they tell you, they don't owe any money. And why should you be paying for something you don't owe?
True.
Aren't you very good?
We are indeed. Billy, people can jump on your website. It's billymcguire.com. They will see tons of information there. They'll even see letters that have been written, history, newspaper clippings.
But remember this, though, Joe. I gave all the phone. I was to be part of the peace reconciliation in Millibank.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful old place. I love living there, and I had all my horses and things there. And I gave all the Vaughan's Hotel papers to the University of Limerick. And as you know, Brendan O'Regan, he handed over to Tom O'Donnell, who's dead since Christmas there, before Christmas. He was 90-something. And they've hidden all the Vaughan's, 3 furniture van loads of paper, the Vaughan's Hotel papers and memorabilia. They took out of Willowbank because my father brought them down from Vaughan's Hotel.
They're all in the archives in the University of Limerick.
They aren't. They're not. They don't know where they are. Isn't that scandalous?
That's scandalous. I think if
the university would do that.
I think if they
don't want to know. I wanted them to go out to Lochar and down to Askeaton and that. They don't want any of that. They just want to get their salaries and pensions, and that's it.
And that's it on it.
That's what you're up against. Anyway, we've had a long chat. I don't know what they earned. But anyway, give my best to your listeners.
Will indeed. And Billy, thanks very much for sharing that information. And look, we'll have you on again.
You're very welcome. That's your sovereignty, and you look after it.
We will
and
indeed.
Your children have to look after it.
Indeed.
Billy,
Billy, quick one. What song would you like us to play for you today?
I don't know.
What about I'll play Irish Men and Irish Laws for you. How about that?
Oh, yeah, I leave it up to you now.
Leave it at.
That's a surprise.
Once upon a time there was Irish ways and Irish laws, villages of Irish blood, waking to the morning, waking to the morning. Then the Vikings came around, turned us up and turned us down, started building boats and towns. They tried to change our living, tried to change our living. Cromwell and his soldiers came, started centuries of shame, but they could not make us turn. We are a river flowing, we're a river flowing. Again, again the soldiers came, burnt our houses, stole our grain, shot the farmers in their fields, working for a living. We have been down the secret of the water sound has kept the spirit of a man above the pain descending, above the pain descending. Today the struggle carries on. I wonder will I live so long to see the gates being opened up to a people and their freedom, a people and their freedom. Once upon a time there was Irish ways and Irish laws, villages of Irish blood,